I am just so delighted, first of all, to see so many familiar faces and also some new faces. So all are welcome. I'm Chris Kohlhofer. I'm a sister servant of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and I'm coming to you today from Carbondale, Pennsylvania, by the magic of Zoom. I work in what I call mobile spirituality ministry, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. I travel around the United States and Canada, and I offer retreats and presentations wherever I'm invited. I have to say, though, it's very disappointing. I'm still waiting for an invitation to Hawaii, and it has not happened yet, but maybe someday. But anyway, these days, since this year of the pandemic, I'm really traveling mostly on Zoom. I believe back in April of 2020, when I realized the pandemic was not going away, that I would have to convert all my retreats and presentations to virtual. It was a lot of work, but at least it enabled me to continue to meet with and be inspired by so many people virtually. And one of the wonderful things of my ministry is that I get to see up close how God is at work in people's lives. I get to listen to both individual and collective wisdom. So here we are tonight, being invited into a season of blossoming. And I think the only thing that could make this night better would be if we could gather in person at Villa Pauline. Because I imagine right now there's a riot of apple trees blossoming, daffodils, lilies, so many different flowers. And it would be beautiful to be there. And I know we all long for that day to happen. But we're meeting virtually out of consideration and concern for one another. And we're grateful for that. Once more, I just want to ask if your microphone is not muted, if you could do that, because this is something we've discovered. If our microphones are not muted, then the sound for everybody else becomes garbled. So if you haven't had a chance to mute your mic, if you could please do that now. I think I'm able to do that myself. Let me just see. Okay, I think that's successful now. Saint Hildegard of Bingen writes about what she calls viriditas. It's a Latin word. And I love it because it means the divine greening power that is in all things, not just the green plants and the trees. That same divine greening power is in each one of us. And I think during spring, we certainly notice it more visibly in the whole created world around us. So it invites us to ask, what learnings might this season of spring offer us? What hopes that were once dormant or buried might be starting to stir in us? And what within us is struggling to grow towards the light? Those are really the questions of a time of blossoming. Now, I do have one practical announcement, which I probably would have said first, and that is this. I live in Carbondale on the second floor of a home that's owned by St. Joseph Center. St. Joseph Center is sponsored by my community, and they care for really people of all ages who have profound physical and mental challenges. So on the first floor of this house, There are 6, I call them boys, but they're really young men in their 20s and 30s who are profoundly physically and mentally challenged. None of them can speak. They can't say any words, but they can communicate. And they communicate by screaming or yelling or grunting. So I just mentioned that. So if you happen to hear any sounds from downstairs, be assured no one is being murdered. It's simply the way these young men speak to each other. Now, we might not hear them tonight because they go to bed pretty early, but you never know. So if you do hear them, I ask simply that you pray for these precious neighbors and also for the aides who care for them. So let's begin right now paying attention to this season of blossoming. And as we begin, we pray that this room may become open to the tender presence that transforms us and changes the world. And when we say this room, we mean on Zoom, the space we're in, our kitchen, our bedroom, our office. Let this space open up so that God's presence can enter in. This year of the pandemic has been full of both loss and gift. We've lost over 3 million neighbors, family, and friends across the world. The pandemic has brought with it closings and unemployment and fear and changes to the way we live our lives. It's also been a time of racial reckoning and Black Lives Matter and the call for equal justice for all people. A time of civil unrest and deep divisions. A time when climate change threatens the very life of this planet we love, Earth, our common home. But it's also been a year full of gifts. So it's important to reflect on what are the gifts of this past year? What has fed your soul during this time? What have been some learnings for you about yourself, about God, and about the world? So, before we go any further, I want us to greet one another. It's a little more challenging to do this on Zoom than it is in person. In person, we could hug, we could say our name, introduce ourselves. But one thing I've learned from cultures other than my own is that the most important thing when we come together is not about the business or the work. It's about greeting one another and acknowledging our presence. So there's a wonderful artist, William Hart McNichols, who paints beautiful icons of the saints and the holy ones. And I love this that he says, that we do this by gazing at icons, and especially this, that we are formed by what we gaze at. We are formed by what we gaze at. What he really means is what we pay attention to, what we look at and listen to and spend our time with. That's what is forming us. So we're going to take a few minutes to say hello by gazing on Zoom. So what I invite you to do, I know we always look like Hollywood squares with these little squares. So I invite you to take a moment and look at, gaze at each one of the beautiful faces in these squares. So take a moment and simply gaze at each face with love and with welcome. This is quite a large group, so it's taking a while to say hello and gaze at everyone. And for those of you who are joining us by phone, imagine that we're gazing at you also with love. So I'd like to invite you into a simple practice that I learned many years ago, and I know many of you are familiar with it, and that is the prayer Namaste. If you're a practitioner of yoga, you're very familiar with this. Um, I have been practicing it for many years, but I was recently reintroduced to it in a beautiful way through our English as a Second Language program in Scranton. Believe it or not, we have some people who are from Bhutan. And the Bhutanese, whenever they meet any of us, always hold their hands in a pose of prayer, and they simply say, Namaste. So I'm going to invite you, this is another way of greeting one another, if you would, to fold your hands in a gesture of prayer. And I'm going to ask you to repeat the words after me. You should stay muted, but you can say the words out loud where you are. And so we say, Namaste. I honor the place in you that is the same in me. I honor the place in you that is the same in me. So if you would repeat the line after I say it. I honor the place in you where the whole universe resides. The place in you where the whole universe resides. I honor the place in you of peace, of light, of love. I honor the place in you of peace, of light, of love. I honor the place in you that is the same in me. I honor the place in you that is the same in me. Namaste. And now I invite us just to bow to one another. So if you're wondering how this evening will unfold, there'll be prayer woven throughout. I'll offer some input. You'll be invited to listen deeply and to connect with your own inner wisdom. And there'll be an opportunity for conversation a little bit later. But here's the thing, the most important is not to hear what I say. The most important is to pay attention to how God is working in you. And I have a perfect example of this. Often when I give guided retreats, at the end of a retreat, someone will come up to me and say, oh, Sister Chris, something you said really impressed me, or something you said really touched me. So of course I want to know, what was that? And so the person tells me, and guess what? I never said that. But that person was doing the real work of retreat, which was to listen to how God was moving in him or her. So what I'd like to invite us to do as we move forward is to set an intention. a good way of figuring out how to do that is to ask, why did you come tonight? Or maybe, what is it that you hoped you would take away from tonight? So let's just take a moment and ask for whatever that grace is. That is your intention for our time together. So hold that intention as we move through this evening. And now I'd like to invite us into a breath prayer. Breath prayer might sound like something very new, but it's actually an ancient practice. We think of after the resurrection of Jesus, when he appeared to the disciples in the locked room. I imagine him looking around at all the faces full of fear, maybe terror, confusion. And what does Jesus do? He says to them, receive the Holy Spirit. And then he breathes on them. That was breath prayer. And we know that breath is a sign of life. How in the delivery room, what does everybody wait for? That first cry, that first wail sometimes, because that is a sign that breath, life is present in that baby. And if we've ever had the grace to accompany someone who is dying, we know how we also wait for that last gasp or that final sigh, which is a sign that breath has left the body and there's no longer physical life. So, in our breath prayer, every moment of our lives we're breathing, aren't we? So we can make that, even though it's very unconscious, a prayer for our own life and the lives of the world. So here's what I invite you to do for breath prayer. Simply sit, maybe you already are doing this, however it's comfortable for you. And let's just take a moment to start paying attention to our breathing, our inhaling, our exhaling. So just a moment of quiet to get in touch with our breath. And as we continue inhaling and exhaling, let our prayer be as we breathe in, Holy One, and as we breathe out, blossom in me. So just let's take a moment for our breath prayer. Holy One, blossom in me. And we breathe this prayer not only for ourselves, but we breathe it for the life of the world. Now, we know there are many ways we can pray. Certainly one of them is praying with nature, so that we learn to read nature almost like a book of God. We learn to read nature as a sign of the presence of God with us. So I'm going to play a little YouTube clip There are no words. There is music in the background, but what you will see, it's a time lapse of flowers that are blossoming. So they're moving from a tight bud to a full blossom. And I'd like to suggest this as you watch and listen. Don't try to analyze it. Sometimes we go right to our heads. I think I would suggest that instead you pay attention to what moves in you as you're watching this. What do you feel or what do you notice? So allow these flowers to blossom and to speak to you. So let's just take a moment to pause, and we're going to have a chance to share around this a little bit later. Uh, just get in touch with what you noticed, what you felt, what you paid attention to. Now, Walter Brueggemann, who's a well-known Old Testament scholar, talks about scarcity and abundance in the mindset of the people of Israel. I think we've had an experience of scarcity, which he calls a myth, this past year. Think of the raids, almost mob scenes in supermarkets when people were trying to get toilet paper or paper towels or hand sanitizers. Well, Brueggemann says that this was a myth, the myth of scarcity, and it was very visible in the people of Israel when they were in exile. Remember how they grumbled against Moses? And what did they say? If only we had died at God's hand in the land of Egypt, because at least when we were there, we had our fill of meat and leeks. But you have led us into the wilderness to die of famine. Brueggemann says it was a huge challenge for the people of Israel to let go of the myth of scarcity and to embrace what he calls the lyric of abundance, God's dream for us, where God provides and cares for us. And that really demanded a paradigm shift. It meant moving from focusing on losses, on what was missing from their lives, like the kettles of meat and onions, to focusing on gratitude and blessings. But the people of Israel did eventually make that shift. And we see it whenever we commemorate the Seder meal. Remember during the Seder meal that there's that recounting of all the wonderful things God had done. And after each one of those things, we all say, Dayenu. It would have been enough if God had done only that one thing. So if God had only parted the Red Sea, Dayenu, it would have been enough. If God had only saved us from Pharaoh, Dayenu, it would have been enough. So how does this translate to our reflection on blossoming? Well, we could say, if God had only created the fruit trees and the tulip bulbs to blossom, Dayenu. If God had only given us the bumblebee, the lavender, the hyacinth, the butterfly, Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. Now look at these images of blossoming. Sometimes instead of living from a sense of abundance, we live from the myth of scarcity. And Richard Rohr says this, that the flow of grace through us is largely blocked when we're living inside a worldview of scarcity, a feeling that there's just not enough of God, enough of me, enough food, healthcare, mercy, and so on. But blossoming is God's dream for us. Blossoming is what the Holy One wants for us. And when we live with the mindset of abundance, we will see the miracle that whatever we give away multiplies. So God's dream, abundant life, God's dream is for our wholeness and well-being. To live from a sense of abundance, a sense of blossoming, is to open our hearts to gratitude, to celebrate the gifts of life, to make a home for flourishing and generosity, to expand our capacity for contentment and gladness. And in closing this part of our time, I'd like to read part of Denise Levertov's wonderful poem called Beginners. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy, only begun to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding, that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. So let's just take a pause to sit with what we've heard, what we've noticed, to see where that has landed. Just a pause to sit with that. So thank you for your attention. I know 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, it's not my prime time. And probably energy could be pretty low after we've all had a very full day. So I thank you for your attention, even the effort to pay attention, which can be pretty great at this time of day, night. We're going to have an opportunity now for some sharing. Let me just check with Marie Pauline and Elena about the breakout rooms or no.
No, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We were going to try breakout rooms where you would have the opportunity to be in a smaller group. But when we live in the universe, what I call the Zoom universe right now, we always have plan A. And then if we're smart, we also have plan B. So we're going to share by plan B. So this is how I'd like to invite you to share, and if you would like to. Since we're a large group and we don't want to have everybody talking at the same time, I'm going to suggest that if you would like to share something, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand. And if you're going to then share something, I'm going to ask that you unmute yourself because we want to be sure that we can hear you. So for this sharing, this conversation, it can be, again, whatever you have heard, noticed, paid attention to. It can be from some of the input, from your own quiet reflection, from the resource paper. I want to tell you, no pressure here, but my favorite part of any retreat is the sharing and the conversation. I like to call it gathering the graces, where we have an opportunity to hear what has been happening in someone's heart, in their mind, in their paying attention, in their praying. So let me just say that if you would like to share something, and you'd be very welcome to do that, could you just raise your hand and hopefully I'll see you and call on you, and then don't forget to unmute yourself. Connie, unmute yourself. Got it.
Hi, as we watched the video of the flowers unfurling and becoming whole, what I thought about was so often, I know for me, I'll get tense and I'm scrunched up, and I'll notice my students getting tense or scrunched up. And it would be really good to switch our thinking, and instead of being tense, we're just to blossom. And then stress is off of us and we can open up and be who we really are, instead of this shadow that we often become because of our human nature. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. Maria, and Maria, don't forget, unmute yourself.
Did it? When I was watching the flowers open up, my first thought was their vulnerability. Because when they're closed in buds, that's their closure, that's their safety. But once they open up, how vulnerable. But at the same time, the dichotomy is that they must open up in order to live, to drink in the moisture, to get the sunshine, to be pollinated in order for the next generation of flowers to come about. And so if I look at life like that, I can stay closed and tight and opposed to anything new or anything outside. But once I open myself up, yes, I may be vulnerable, but that's the only way I can experience what is really happening around me and absorb it, absorb the life that's being bestowed upon me just by breathing and sunlight and moisture and the bird song around me. So I saw how each flower represents each of us.
Thank you. Judy.
While I was watching the flowers open, and of course, it was done at a much faster rate than they normally do. Blossoming is a slow process, and I think we realize it's with us too. This past week, I saw a documentary called, I think I got the title straight, My Teacher, the Octopus. A really beautiful documentary. This was a documentary on how this man befriended an octopus. Now, I wasn't so much interested, as my friends know, in the science of it, but what got me, and especially some of the things that Maria just said, each frame told you what day this man dove down into the ocean. And over a period of over 300 days, he befriended this octopus so that the octopus took one of his, suction cups and put it on his hand, with the understanding that they became friends. And I thought of that in terms of our own friendship with God and our own relationship with God, that it takes time. Just as it takes time for the flowers to open, it takes time for us in our relationship with God. It takes time if we really want a solid friendship with people. It takes time. And I believe now that that's what nature has to say to us. Take your time.
Oh, is it Rita? Unmute yourself, Rita. Got it.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm Sister Madeline Rita. I'm a Mercy from Rhode Island. And as many of you may know, our community is going through what we refer to as our journey of oneness. And what struck me so deeply were the words, God's dream for us, abundant life. And that was brought to light with all the beautiful flowers that were blossoming. And the beauty is to be open. The beauty is reflected when we are opened. And in our own community, the other phrase that just struck me that I never thought about was a communion of struggle. How each of us struggles to become that beauty of the beloved. This is such a great opportunity for me personally to blossom, to allow God to open me and all of us in community to truly live a journey of oneness with the Holy One. Thank you.
Mary Joan?
Thank you, Chris. What I'm going to share is very simple, but it struck me very deeply. And that is, as the blossoms were slowly unfolding and unfolding more, I just felt this joy in realizing every stage of that opening is precious and beautiful. And sometimes I notice in my life, I rush to get to the finished product. Not so much intangible things, but I mean, in my own heart, I can be kind of judgmental on myself, but to just enjoy every step in the process. It's okay that it's not finished yet. God is delighting in it, so why shouldn't I? Thank you.
Lisa?
Thank you. One of the things that struck me was a distinction that came in my heart between blooming and blossoming. And to me, blossoming is about that perennial, right? That beautiful flower or plant that lives through all the seasons of the year, right? Weathers all the storms, enjoys all the sunshines and rains. And I was just particularly struck then with the images of the flowers and really appreciating both God's grace in that, but the resiliency of us individually and collectively to go into the metamorphosis, if you will, of winter, and then see those bright colors and that mysterious unfolding that comes with the springtime, whether literally or symbolically. So I just wanted to share that.
Oh, Laura.
Hi everyone, my name's Laura. I would like to share about how interesting I found the video. Because I loved when I was a child, I loved to find dandelions and blow on them. And I loved how I was able to blow on the dandelions. And when I saw the dandelion, I remember doing that as a child. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Oh, Marie Pauline.
Okay. I liked, I'm going to switch from the blossomings to what you said about scarcity and abundance. And when you have deep gratitude, I think, and when you're very grateful and thankful for everything that is, the scarcity and abundance becomes enough. So that, and you said that, and it's sort of like that, if you put them together, you've got enough, and it's more than enough. So that you can accept the scarcity that you have in your life, but you can also accept the abundance because it's enough. I like that.
Well, anyone else? I'm trying to scan 2 screens here, so I hope I'm not missing somebody. Let me ask you this. How many of you either have a garden, are gardeners, or have a special love for flowers, trees, etc.? Hand raised. Is there anything in particular, those of you who are connected to some kind of garden or gardening, is there anything in particular that you've learned from that experience? Anything you especially appreciate about that experience? Marjorie.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Marjorie.
Um, I do love gardening a lot. And what your question that you posed, what was something new this year? This year I started so many things from seed, and I realized the patience that it takes to wait for something to become, not just to peek through that first layer of soil, but to continue to grow and care for those seeds throughout their growth. And now they need a different kind of care than that flower that's already established and out in the garden, weathering the storm. But the ones that are inside yet, that are still waiting to become strong enough so that they can be out on their own and others can come to appreciate them. But having them inside, come to a new appreciation for that seed that is just beginning to grow. And I think the patients that I hear so many of the sisters that I live with, talk about, like, oh, it's up a little more. And there's that sense of hope that watching them grow so slowly, we want to push them along, but they have their own timeline. And so that was just a new aspect, because many times I put seeds outside in the garden and then they start to come up when they're ready. But having them inside has taken a new kind of viewing every day and a different kind of patience. And come to appreciate starting plants from seeds more this year than ever before. So thank you.
Thank you. Laura.
Hi again, everyone. My name's Laura. I only know about the limited knowledge about gardening that I have personally is growing bamboos. And because my roommate and I have a bamboo plant here, and it's a big one. And so I noticed that when we take care of it a little more than usual, in other words, when we put it out in the sun, it grows a little more. But when it stays in, when it's not in the sun, it's a little more brown. It has a lot more dead leaves. But I love how the bamboo plant gives me, or gives always, a new chance at life. The bamboo plant always gives me another chance at renewal, another chance to do better. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I think we have time maybe for one or two more comments. Your last chance. Connie? Unmute yourself. Connie?
I love flowers and trees and everything, but I hate gardening. Nevertheless, I have a garden. But last year, I had 2 daisy plants that I was going to put in the ground because they're perennials. But I never got to it, and it snowed and they withered, and I just didn't have the heart to throw them out. Well, even though they were in a thin pot, they blossomed and I'm going to plant them now, but even though I didn't care, they were cared for.
Mhm.
I did care, but I just don't like dirt. Thank you.
Do we have one more? Carol.
I was sitting on my front porch today reading, and we're fortunate enough that at the end of the porch, there's a holly tree and there's a pair of cardinals that are nesting in there.
Oh,
And their babies have hatched, and they're very quiet until one of the parents comes to feed them. And then you can hear them. I knew they hatched because I stepped out onto the porch one evening and I could hear this little peeping sound. And today, both the male and the female feed the babies, and they were coming and going and feeding and very busy. And then I noticed that each of them took time at some point to fly up into a tree near the nest and just spend some time singing. And I thought that was a wonderful metaphor, because I'm usually very, very busy and doing, and yet these birds, in the midst of feeding their young, took the time to sing. And it was a beautiful thing.
thank you. Well, let's just take a moment to honor and give thanks for what has been shared aloud, and also to honor and give thanks for all that we continue to hold in the silence of our hearts. So a moment of quiet to honor that. So I'd like to invite us into a very simple closing prayer, which is actually the body prayer that was on your resource sheet. So if you would sit however is comfortable for you, I'm going to try to show you my hands, but you can have your hands on your lap if you like. Simply hold your hands with the palms turned upward and open. We do this in a gesture of receiving. And while your hands are open and receiving, take a moment to give thanks for one gift for which you're especially grateful. One gift that is blossoming in you. Hold that gift in your hands with great tenderness and care. And now simply bow and give thanks. Well, I give thanks tonight for all the beautiful blossoming that I see and notice and pay attention to in each one of you who chose to be part of this time. I'm really so grateful to each one of you. I'm not sure if Sister Marie Pauline, do you have anything that you wanted to say in closing or about Villa Pauline?
Actually, I'd like to thank you for your kindness in offering to give this Zoom to us today. I appreciate the gift that you are to spirituality. So many of us are searching right now in this COVID time for something more. And we're searching for that spirituality. And we hope that Villa Pauline Retreat and Spiritual Center gives that to the people who come here. And we invite you to come and join us. And now that I have your email addresses, I will be sending you whatever we can to increase your awareness of God and his love for each one of us. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Chris, for your talk. Is there a chance to for you to email us or me, whichever the case may be, the Namaste prayer? I really enjoyed praying that tonight.
Yes, how about I'll save myself some work and give some work to Sister Marie Pauline, because you have all the addresses. If I email you the Namaste prayer, could you send it out to the people who registered for tonight?
Surely, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Marie Pauline. Thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was
Okay.
deeply
Thank you,
beautiful, Chris.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night,
Everybody.
everyone.
Right.
Bye.
Good night.
Good to see you.
God bless. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.